Welcome back to Revise and Resubmit, the podcast that takes, those really dense academic papers and makes them surprisingly interesting. I'm Pavlov.
And I'm Nikita. So today we're kicking things off by looking at some really interesting research. It was actually part of the reading list for the virtual summer school in Entrepreneurship Research 2025.
Oh, right. That's a fantastic program.
It really is. It's pretty cool. This is actually the 5th year for this completely free summer school. It goes all the way back to 2021. Just great for making this kind of research accessible.
Absolutely. And initiatives like that are so vital, aren't they?
Yeah.
For, nurturing entrepreneurship research. So, yeah, a big thank you has to go out to the organizers.
Definitely.
Professor Vishal K. Gupta and PhD candidate Athena Skiatopoulou, both from the University of Alabama. It's commendable work they're doing, spearheading this unique initiative.
Couldn't agree more. So, this deep dive, it's sparked by this, really thought-provoking paper, Bennedsen and his co-authors, from way back in 2007, Quarterly Journal of Economics.
A classic.
Right. And the core question they were wrestling with, and what we want to kind of unpack today, is what really happens, performance-wise, when a company CEO is succeeded by a family member versus, bringing someone in from the outside.
And they used some amazing data from Denmark to get at this.
Exactly. So for you, the learner listening in, we know you're keen on understanding what makes businesses tick, leadership dynamics and all that.
This should be right up your alley. We're aiming to pull out the key insights, give you a clear picture of what they found, but, without getting totally bogged down in academic speak.
Yeah, get the crucial takeaways nice and clear.
That's the plan.
Okay, so thinking about family businesses and who takes over, it's not immediately obvious if keeping it in the family is good or bad, is it? The theories seem a bit, mixed.
It's a great way to put it, yeah. There's a real debate. On one side, you could argue family CEOs are just more invested. It's their name, their legacy on the line, right?
Right. Higher stakes, personally.
Exactly. And they often have all this, firm-specific knowledge, stuff they've picked up over years that an outsider just wouldn't have. Plus, maybe more trust, a longer-term focus, thinking about the next generation, not just next quarter's results.
That makes a lot of sense. You can definitely see that deep personal commitment. But then there are the counter-arguments, too, the potential downsides.
Precisely. The big worries often center on, family drama interfering with business decisions. Maybe the best person doesn't get the job. It just goes to, Cousin Bob.
Yeah, nepotism concerns.
And maybe the most fundamental thing is just the talent pool, right?
Yeah.
It's inherently smaller if you're only looking within the family versus the entire executive market out there. You might just end up with someone less capable.
Right. So you've got this real tension, potential benefits, potential drawbacks. And that's where this Bennedsen paper gets so interesting, especially because of the data they used. It sounds incredible.
It really was something special. They managed to get data covering almost all limited liability firms in Denmark.
Yep.
That's huge.
Wow.
But the killer part was linking the managers to detailed family info from the Danish civil registration system. We're talking marriage records, kids, the works. They could basically build CEO family trees.
Okay, so not just publicly listed companies, but pretty much everyone. And with official family records.
Exactly. Most studies just look at public firms, which is just a small slice.
Yeah.
This gave them this incredibly broad, deep view across the whole economy, including all those private firms you usually don't hear about in research. That's a massive advantage.
Yeah, that level of detail must allow for a much more rigorous analysis than usual. Okay, so they have this amazing data set. What did they find when they first started crunching the numbers?
Well, their first pass used something called a difference in differences approach. Think of it like comparing two groups, firms that appointed a family CEO and firms that hired an outsider, and looking at how their performance changed after that happened.
Trying to isolate the effect of that choice.
Right. And what they saw initially was, kind of interesting. The firms promoting family CEOs actually were more profitable before the changeover.
Oh, okay. So they were already doing well.
Seemed like it. But crucially, their performance didn't really change much up or down significantly after the family member took charge.
Huh. And what about the ones who hired outsiders?
Those firms, the ones hiring unrelated CEOs, they tended to see their profitability improve after the new boss arrived.
So that initial look kind of hints that maybe family succession leads to lower relative performance compared to bringing in a pro.
That was the suggestion, yeah. But, and this is a big but.
Here it comes. Just because things happen together doesn't mean one caused the other, right? I'm guessing choosing a family CEO isn't exactly a random event.
You nailed it. That's the classic endogeneity problem. The decision itself is tangled up with other factors. Maybe families only appoint a relative if the outlook is already good, or maybe if things was rocky and they want someone trusted.
Right, so how do you know if it's the CEO choice affecting performance or if the expected performance affected the choice? It's tricky.
Very tricky. It makes it incredibly hard to isolate the true impact of just being a family CEO versus an outsider.
So how did they try to untangle that? You mentioned they had a clever solution.
They did, yeah. They used what's called an instrumental variable. And their instrument was pretty ingenious, actually.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
It was the gender of the outgoing CEO's firstborn child.
The gender of the firstborn. Okay, wait. How does that connect to whether a family CEO is good or bad for the business? That seems random.
Well, that's kind of the point. The logic is this. In many families, especially back then, there was this tendency towards, the firstborn son inheriting things, maybe even the business, primogeniture.
Okay, I can see that. A male firstborn might make a family succession seem more likely, more natural path.
Exactly. So the gender of the firstborn could plausibly influence the likelihood of a family succession. But here's the key bit for it being a good instrument.
It shouldn't directly affect the company's future performance itself.
Right. Precisely. The researchers argued that for most of these CEOs, their first kid was born long before widespread ultrasound. So the gender was basically down to chance. It's really hard to argue that whether the first baby was a boy or a girl decades ago would directly predict the firm's profitability way down the line during the succession.
Okay, so it acts like a random nudge. It pushes some families towards family succession for reasons totally unrelated to the business's future prospects.
That's the idea. It's a clever way to find variation in family succession that isn't driven by those tricky, unobserved factors about the firm's outlook.
Brilliant, actually. Did the data back this up? Did having a male firstborn actually make family succession more likely?
It did, quite strongly. Their first stage results, as they call them, showed that firms where the outgoing CEO had a son first were significantly more likely, about 9.6 percentage points more likely to appoint a family CEO. That's a jump of nearly 33%.
Wow, okay, so a real connection there.
And it was statistically very significant, not just a fluke.
Okay, so the instrument predicts the choice. But they also had to check it wasn't sneakily correlated with other things that could affect performance, right? Like maybe families with firstborn sons just happen to have bigger companies or something.
Absolutely crucial step. They did a ton of checks. They compared firms with male firstborns versus female firstborns across a whole range of characteristics at the time of succession.
Like what?
Things like profitability, company age, size, leverage.
Yeah.
But also family characteristics of the outgoing CEO, total number of kids, marital status, divorce history, you name it.
And indifferences popped up.
Nope. That was the key. They found no statistically significant differences in any of those factors between the two groups.
Okay, that really strengthens the case. The gender of the firstborn seems like a genuinely random nudge affecting only the succession choice and not linked to underlying firm health.
Exactly. It makes the instrument look valid.
It's the moment of truth. With this clever instrument in hand, what did the analysis reveal about the causal impact of family CEOs on performance? What's the bottom line?
The bottom line, using this IV analysis, was pretty stark. Family successions cause a significant negative hit to company performance. Specifically, operating profitability on assets dropped by at least 4 percentage points around the CEO transition.
4 percentage points. Wow, that's a substantial drop. And you said earlier this IV estimate was even bigger than their initial comparison suggested.
That's right, which is really interesting. It suggests the simpler comparisons were actually understating the true negative effect.
How come?
Well, it might be because, like we discussed, families sometimes appoint a relative precisely when things look tough. That would muddy the waters in a simple comparison. The IV cuts through that, isolating the effect more cleanly, and it turns out to be even more negative.
So it really looks like choosing a family member, on average, leads to poorer performance. Was this just a temporary dip, or did it stick around?
Good question. They looked at that, and no, they didn't find evidence that these family-run firms bounced back later on. The underperformance seemed quite persistent.
Okay. Did they try any other angles to confirm this wasn't just some weird artifact of the firstborn gender instrument?
They did. As a robustness check, they used another instrument, the unexpected death of the outgoing CEO.
Another event that forces a succession, potentially unplanned.
Exactly. And using that alternative approach, they basically gained the same answer. Family CEOs were associated with lower profitability.
Okay, so multiple methods pointing in the same direction.
Yeah.
But could it be that family CEOs aren't actually worse managers that just maybe report lower profits, like taking more perks or cash out of the business informally?
That's a really important alternative to consider, cash flow diversion. They tested that too.
How?
They checked if the negative effect was stronger in smaller firms or firms without formal boards, places where that kind of behavior might be easier. But nope, the negative impact held even in larger firms and those with proper boards.
Interesting.
And get this, the underperformance was still there even when the departing CEO's family stayed on the board after the new CEO took over.
Okay, that makes they're just hiding profits argument seem less likely. It points more towards actual operational differences.
It does seem that way, yeah.
Now, thinking about that talent pool issue again, did it matter what kind of industry the company was in? Like maybe in some sectors, family ties are less of a handicap?
Yes. They found some really interesting nuances there. The negative impact of family CEOs was significantly stronger in industries that were growing fast or relied heavily on a highly skilled workforce.
So places where top-notch management skills are probably most critical.
Exactly. Places where maybe you really need that external expertise and broad experience. But interestingly, they didn't find a significant performance gap in industries where family successions were already super common.
Why might that be?
Well, it could be that in those industries, there are established networks or specific knowledge that family members are better plugged into, maybe mitigating the downside. It also helps explain why the simple OLS results differ from the IV results that IV randomly assigns family CEOs, so it doesn't overrepresent those niche industries where they might fare okay.
That makes sense. So context matters. Did they look beyond just profitability, other measures of success?
Yep, they check return on assets, return on capital employed, same story, negative impact from family CEOs.
Okay.
And another interesting point, they didn't find that family CEO firms were less likely to go bankrupt or be liquidated. So you can't really argue they're just being more conservative and stable.
Right. It's not like they're underperforming on profits, but making up for it in sheer survival rates.
In fact, they found less profitable firms run by family CEOs were actually more likely to end up in bankruptcy or liquidation compared to similarly struggling firms with non-family bosses.
Wow. Okay. So pulling this all together, the main thrust of the paper seems pretty clear.
It really is.
Yeah.
The interpretation they offer, strongly supported by that instrumental variable analysis, is that professional non-family CEOs bring significant value to organizations.
That comparison firms that hired an outsider versus those nudged into hiring family by the firstborn's gender, it really highlights the performance advantage of the professionals.
Exactly.
Okay, so for the learner tuning in, wrapping this up, what's the main takeaway here?
I think the core message is that this very careful study gives a strong reason to believe that while family businesses are incredibly important, just relying on family ties for the top job can really hurt a company's performance, especially, it seems, in dynamic, skill-heavy industries.
And that methodology, using the firstborn's gender as an instrument, was just so key to making a convincing case for causality, wasn't it?
Absolutely. It's a great example of clever research design tackling a really tricky question. And this leaves us with a big thought-provoking point to consider. Well, given these findings, what does this mean for actual family businesses trying to plan succession? How do you balance that pull to keep it in the family with the evidence suggesting professional leadership might be better for growth and success?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? A real challenge. And maybe a good area for listeners to explore further, like looking into how successful multi-generational family firms actually do handle succession.
Precisely. What strategies do they use? Do they focus on professionalizing management underneath a family CEO or developing family talent rigorously? There's probably a lot to learn there.
Definitely food for thought. Well, this has been fascinating, really digging into the nuts and bolts of this study. Thanks for walking us through it.
My pleasure. It's important work. And don't forget to subscribe to Revise and Resubmit on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And if you're enjoying the show and want to support us in creating more insightful content, consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Every contribution helps us continue this journey of exploration and discovery. Until next time, keep those minds curious, keep questioning, and keep revising and resubmitting.